Hi, welcome to Books and Brands with Hannah. I'm so glad you're here. This is my first ever video and let's get into it. We're going to be talking about July reads and what I read in July. I read 9 books. Some of them were audiobooks, some of them were physical books. So let's get into it. I have my handy dandy books right here and we're gonna get into them. So I read a lot of audiobooks this month because I actually just got Libby. I love Libby so much and it's made me such an audiobook person on there, specifically because I can read them faster. I like to read them on my walks in the morning. So I like literally put them on and listen as I walk. I feel like reading books versus reading audiobooks though is a whole different thing as a reader. So therefore I kind of love reading books more, like physical books, but I get like why audiobooks are so important. I so wish that audiobooks had been a thing for like textbooks back when I was in college. I would have loved that. Anyway, let's get into what I read this month. So to start, I first off read Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I don't have a physical book of this because this is one of my audiobooks. This one I actually got from Audible and it's by Ashley Herring Blake. This was a 4-star for me. I really liked this story. It's all about this girl named Delilah Green. So she essentially is asked by her stepsister Astrid to come home for her wedding and be her wedding photographer. And they have a complicated relationship because Astrid's actually her stepsister and essentially she goes home to help with this wedding. And when she's home, she re-meets Astrid's friend group, which includes Claire, and Claire and her have changed a lot. Claire has a daughter. Delilah Green's changed a lot because she's a lot more comfortable in who she is. And essentially they start this flirtation and they become more and more to each other. And Delilah really hits it off with Claire's daughter, who I think is 12 years old, and her name is Ruby. And Ruby and her really hit it off. They talk about photography and it's like a really sweet thing in the book is just like their relationship and how they get together and just like the family dynamics that come into play here. Like they talk a lot about Claire's ex too and how he's kind of a mess, and like there's even a story arc with him that's beautiful there. And this is just a really sweet read. Like honestly, this is my first sapphic romance and I really enjoyed it. I just loved their dynamic and how they just really cared about each other. It felt like it was almost more about the emotional connection than the physical connection for the most part for these two. And I really did enjoy Ruby as well. I love a good kid character. It's just something I've started to discover about myself. I used to be a preschool teacher, so it checks out. The next book I read this month was A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. And ooh, I feel so bad about this one because I absolutely adored the 7-Year Slip. So cute. Lemon will always mean something different to me after that book. It was just so sweet. How it talked about grief was amazing, but we're not doing a book review about that book. We're reviewing, at the end of the day, A Novel Love Story, and that was probably a 3-star for me. Pause for a second because I just want to talk to you guys about my star rating. I don't ever rate anything below a 3. This is because I work with authors. So along with being a reader, I love authors and I work with them as a social media manager, and I just don't believe in rating books below a 3 because of that. Just for myself personally, I think readers should have any right to rate however they want, but personally, I do not rate books. If I think they're below a 3, I just won't rate them on Goodreads or wherever I'm rating them. I use Goodreads and Storygraph for rating, and I just don't rate them when that happens. So essentially 3 is the lowest I will give a book if I'm going to rate it. And yeah, this one just didn't do it for me. So it's all about Eileen, who is essentially in this romance book club, and she's in love with this author. Not in love with her, but you know what I mean. Like, she loves this author's books, and she had this fake town in these books called Elderton. And Elderton is this place where all these different people fell in love. So it's like a romance series. I kind of imagined it as like a Sarah Adams series, essentially. And it was like small town, this little small town where all these different types of people fell in love. And honestly, I don't know. I think I might be biased here because I really just don't think I'm into this thing that I see a lot of authors do in their books, and we're now seeing Ashley Poston do in her books. We especially see it with Emily Henry, where they really like make their books within books. And I don't know, I'm already reading, like I already know I'm reading. Do I need to also be within a book? Like, I'm just not into that trope, I think, and it really reads for me. Like, I can't get into it. And I really think too that part of the problem with this book specifically was that it really wasn't a romance, and I really was expecting that like magical romance that happened within a 7-year slip, and it just didn't happen. And I felt like kind of let down by that. Yeah, and it almost felt like it tried too hard too. It wasn't like the natural, beautiful thing that happened to us within the story of the 7-year slip. It was so much more convoluted. I just didn't like it as much. But essentially the story is all about Anders and Eileen, and they meet within this fake world that she suddenly drives into when she's going to her book club's romance meeting, where no one else is going to show up because everyone else has things come up. And essentially she's going to the middle of nowhere in New York to go read romance books alone. And she's going to go read this author's book that she loves. Her name's Rachel Flowers. She's going to go read these books essentially. And instead she ends up in the town where these books take place, which is the coolest part of the book, to be honest. It's like the premise is cool. It just didn't hit for me. I thought that also that the side characters just weren't fully developed. They didn't feel like they were there enough. There felt like there were maybe too many of them, and that was part of the problem, was like when there are too many characters, sometimes it feels kind of like you can't develop all the characters. However, the next book I read this month has none of those problems and a ton of characters. So let's get into that one because I'm really excited to talk about this one. This is the next book. It's The Love of My Afterlife by Kristy Greenwood. And oh my goodness, I fell in love with this book. It was definitely a 5-star. It's everything I wanted a novel love story to be. Sorry, Ashley Poston, because I really love your books. It just wasn't my favorite of yours. But this 5-star, like maybe 6-star, beautiful, beautiful book. So essentially, I'm gonna read you guys a little bit of the back because I don't wanna accidentally spoil it. And this one is really easy to spoil because I just don't think this book blurb back here is really descriptive of what I got from this book. But that's a whole different problem because I actually enjoyed it more than what this back cover sounded like. So anyway, it says a recently deceased woman meets the one in the afterlife waiting room, scoring a second chance at life and love if she can find him on earth before 10 days are up. And this was so beautiful. She meets this guy named Jonah in this waiting room. After she dies, she chokes on a hamburger, which is hilarious, by the way. She chokes on a hamburger and then she is sent to the afterlife, which happens to be just like this laundromat. And there's like this person called an afterlife therapist, and she's talking to her essentially. And then she meets this guy named Jonah who's been sent to the afterlife, but he doesn't actually belong there. And they are flirting and everything. And then the afterlife specialist is like, oh, you know what? Like, I'll send you back And if you kiss this guy in 10 days, then you can come back to Earth forever and stay there and have your old life back. And of course, Delphi's like, of course I want that. That's exactly what I want. So she goes back to Earth, and she really, for the first time ever in her life, fully lives her life while trying to find this man. And it's beautiful. It talks all about this found family. There's this guy, Mr. Yoon, that lives next door that she helps take care of. I'm not going to go too much into detail about him because it's kind of a spoiler, but he is the sweetest, like it's the sweetest relationship, like elder to young person relationship I've ever heard about in a book. It was just so, so sweet. Actually, maybe this is the month of like elder relationships, because another book I read, Dear Dotty, that I'll talk about later, also has those relationships as well that are super sweet. But I just love this like dynamic between them. And she also has to enlist her neighbor Cooper, as well as some random people she meets along the way, including a librarian named Alid. And it's just beautiful how all these people connect and the story that's behind all these relationships. And there's a love story in there that's really sweet too. But I honestly think this one is all about the found family. If you're a found family lover, this book is for you. If you love magical realism, this is also a super fun take on magical realism. And I just adored this book. I can't even say enough good things about it. Like, I didn't expect anything that was happening in this, and I could not put it down. I think I read this in like 4 days because I just couldn't put it down. So after I read The Love of Your Afterlife, I read I Hope This Doesn't Find You, which is by Anna Liang. I think it's Liang. I'm sorry guys, I butcher names all of the time. I'm really trying here. I think it's Anne Liang, but it is such a fun one. It's all about like academic rivals, and in this one it's about Sadie here and Julius here, and they are academic rivals. This is a YA. She writes him some emails that are not so nice, and from there things ensue. They are both part of the class government, so they kind of have to spend time with each other, and then the principal forces them to spend more time together, and the forced proximity of that makes this so fun. It is such a good academic rivals book. I really like, typically this isn't my favorite trope. Like, I'm not a big like academic rivals kind of person, but this one really hit. I actually read this from Libby too, and it was on audiobook. I read a little bit of this book, but mostly I listened on audiobook. I just happened to already have this, and it's been on my reading list for like literally months now. And this was so sweet. It was probably a 4.25 stars for me because I kind of treat YA differently than I would adult fiction and romance, whereas this would probably have been like a 4-star as a adult book. This is a 5-star for me when it comes to YA. It just had such a sweet dynamic, and like you really felt like they understood each other and that Julius really, really wanted her. You know, there's something special about like young love in books. It's just one of my favorite things to read about. So next after that, this is another audiobook, and it was The Cousins by Karen M. McManus. I think this is probably a 3.5 star for me. I found this narrative kind of hard to figure out. So essentially with this book, it was all about Millie and Aubrey and Jonah Story, and they're cousins who were sent to this island that's kind of near Martha's Vineyard, and it is this island where their grandmother lives. And their grandmother, when her kids were younger, cut off her children, and nobody knows why. Like, they never speak of it, why they got cut off. And essentially that's why when they get a letter from their grandmother asking them to come to this island one summer to work for her, they are so shocked because they would never have suspected that they would ever be asked to come to this island because their parents have all been cut off from this lady. They essentially are not very excited about coming to this island. And when Millie, Aubrey, and Jonah get there, there's a lot of twists that happen there, and they start to uncover some family secrets and figure out some stuff about their grandmother and the dynamic at the place where she owns on this island, and start uncovering more and more of that. So there's some pros and some cons to this book. One of the biggest pros that I loved was like the relationships that started to develop between the cousins. I also really loved Millie. She was a very interesting character, and she felt like the realist of the cousins. My biggest drawback of this book was it felt not at all realistic. It also just at times was very confusing. I don't know if this is because it was on audiobook, and honestly, I'm pretty new to listening to audiobooks consistently, so maybe this is on me, but the plot didn't quite feel right to me. It didn't feel finished. I think it could have been a little bit better had the pace been a little bit better. But, you know, this just wasn't one of my favorites. I am the biggest fan, by the way, of One of Us is Lying. I loved that book. I haven't read the rest of the series. That's on my TBR too. It's actually on hold on Libby for me right now, but I desperately want to read the rest of that series. But so far, I've only really liked that one book from her. Anyway, let's go on to the next book. This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. This is my first Carley Fortune book, and honestly, I loved the summer vibes so much in this one. This was probably a 3.75 star for me. I liked it a lot. I loved Felix, but I didn't love this whole story. So essentially, Lucy is going to Prince Edward Island for a vacation, and she meets this guy Felix, and Felix ends up being her best friend's brother, who is coming on vacation with her too, because Prince Edward Island is actually her hometown, and Felix, yep, he's her younger brother, and things ensue from there. Bridget had only told Lucy one thing about her brother: do not fall in love with my brother, is what she essentially said to her. And look what she did. She had a one-night stand with him, and things ensue from there. This essentially has different timelines. It goes from the past to the present, to the past to the present. And Bridget's about to get married, and is kind of telling the story of the summer that she's about to get married in. And it's a beautiful story. Felix and Lucy's relationship, I really do think that they are meant to be in this book. And I loved that about this, was that it just felt like he was truly, truly infatuated and in love with her. And he liked her for more than just like her looks. I find in a lot of romances, like one we'll talk about in a little, cough, Lizzie score here. I find a lot of them, it feels like it's somewhat about lusty looks and like just the physicality. And this felt like more than that. It felt like Felix like really, really thought she was special and that she was really for him. And I just love that dynamic, and how they were so patient with each other, and how they were so patient waiting for each other to be ready for each other, and how they exchanged gifts in this was very sweet. If your love language is gifts and receiving things, you're gonna freaking love this one. I also want to give a big shout out for the vibes of summer here. Really desperately want to go to Prince Edward Island now. And actually I'm planning to go to Prince Edward Island with one of my college friends and my husband and his wife. Next off, this is Dear Dotty, and Dear Dotty is so cute. It's by Jaclyn Westlake. This is actually a debut, and I gave it about a 4.5 out of 5, but I think I would really rate it a 5 for a debut, essentially, because this was such a sweet, great debut. It was one of my favorites for like older versus younger people dynamics. I loved like her dynamic with her aunt, but I also loved her dynamic with her parents as well, and how it talked about like family relationships. So essentially Rosie Benson does not have it all together at all. She's a 20-something-year-old who's struggling to figure out what's going on with her life, and then Her aunt Dotty passes away, and when her aunt Dotty passes away, she begins to kind of spiral, and she is kind of trying to figure out what to do with her work environment. She's trying to figure out what to do with her life with other people. She's trying to figure out her relationship with her best friend, which has just become very complicated due to her dating someone that she is not so excited about her dating. This one is just so much like a coming of age story of a 20-something. And in my 30s, I still love these kind of stories because I think they really tell so much about like human nature and how we interact with the world. And this was more about friendship, love, caring for your family than anything else. Honestly, it was not really a love story, which is what I originally thought I was getting into. But in a lot of ways, it was more special than that. It told the story of how Rosie became the person she wanted to be. It's such an important thing for us to all figure out who we want to be versus who society wants us to be. They also do such a great job of showing a relationship between best friends, as well as showing a relationship between a person and a dog. This one also made me cry because there was this moment in this story that I will never forget. It's when she just discovers that Dotty has died right after. It's just so touching. And the dog part of it is so touching too. I can't tell you more because it'll spoil it, but please read this one if you love stories that involve animals, if you love stories involve coming of age, this one's for you. Okay, next off was Dear Edward. I also listened to this one in audiobook as well. It was from the library, and I actually just kind of impulse got this one. Basically, the premise of this one, I'm gonna read it to you. One summer morning, 12-year-old Edward, his beloved older brother, his parents, and 183 other passengers board a flight to Newark headed for Los Angeles. Among them is a Wall Street wonder kid, a young woman coming to terms with an unexpected pregnancy, an injured vet returning from Afghanistan, a business tycoon, and a free-spirited woman running away from her controlling husband. And then tragically, the plane crashes. Edward is the sole survivor. And from there, we get Edward's story as well as the passenger's last day story. And gosh, this one was done with beautiful reverence to the actual story of this. I can't remember what flight number it was, but this actually happened where a kid was the sole survivor of a plane crash, and she essentially was inspired by his story to write Edward's story because she had two sons that it reminded her of. And man, she just shows so well sibling relationships here. She shows so well grief here. She also really brings you into a story. I have a thing about literary fiction. Like, literary fiction is probably not my favorite genre. So this one is a 5-star for me because when it comes to like the general genre of literary fiction, it's hard for me to give you a 5-star, but I really thought this one showed so well this story and really told you, again, another kind of coming of age story of Edward's. I thought the writing style was somewhat difficult at times. If you are someone who really likes dialogue heavy things, this one isn't as dialogue heavy as some of the other books I've talked about today. If you're someone who has a hard time with like feeling like you're overhead in a story instead of like in the story, then this one might be hard for you. I also really loved Edward's relationship with his neighbor, which is Shay. He really becomes so close to her, and the beautiful relationship that like we all kind of can remember a relationship like this that felt so special when we were children, that helped us become who we are, and you can kind of see her helping him become who he was. Yeah, I just thought this one was a great way of showing us a story that's a hard thing to listen to. Like, it is really hard to listen to parts of this and you're like, oh, these poor people, like this is their last day on earth and they don't know during a lot of it, and that's really hard to listen to. And then it's also hard to sometimes think about Edward because Edward essentially, he lost his whole family and he has to come into this dynamic between his uncle and aunt who he ends up living with that isn't the best dynamic, and he does it like with such grace and they do it with such love, and it's just a beautiful story. So if you want something that really shows family dynamics, that is a story that's somewhat gonna make you cry and be touched and feel like you're almost like learning about someone's life and how they overcome grief, then this one might be for you. Okay, next off, I have not fully done with this. I'm just gonna pre-warn you. I have 50 pages left, but I will be done by the end of the night, and it is currently the 30th of July. So I just wanted to record this before the month is out. But this I'm almost done with. It's By a Thread by Lucy Score. I've read one other Lucy Score book before, and it was The Things We Never Get Over, which is a pretty sweet story. It's from the first one of the Knockham More, I think is what it's called, series. And I have the other 3 up there. Spoiler, I'm planning on doing a video reading this author because I have some controversial thoughts here. So essentially this book starts when a guy named Dominic gets this girl fired named Allie from a pizza parlor. He says she's being rude, blah, blah, blah. And they start this like kind of grumpy sunshine sort of relationship, but they're both kind of grumpy. And she can be a little bit sunshiny, but she's mostly grumpy at him. And they just kind of have this fight back and forth dynamic all of the time. And when she gets fired from this pizza place, his mom is like, oh, I'm gonna give her a new job. So she gives her a job at this fashion magazine called Label, and they start working together. And this becomes a grumpy boss romance from there. Essentially, he and her have fights all of the time. They go back and forth. He wants to be near her, she wants to be near him, but they have a hard time being near each other, blah, blah, blah. Eventually they fall in love, but do they? Because some of the parts of this, I'm like, are they in love? Because I don't know about that. So let's talk about my opinions here. So I think this is gonna be a 3. I think something that's great about Lucy Score, and part of the reason I've gotten through 2 Lucy Score books at this point, is her banter is so on point. Like the texting conversations in here are so cute. The friend dynamics really come along in the texting dynamics in this book. The relationships that are outside of the love interests are very cute in Lucy Score books. I think she does a little too many relationships in this one. I actually wish she cut it in half almost with the relationships, because I feel like there are too many people and you can't develop them fully. Whereas I didn't feel like that with the Nakamura first book. I loved that family dynamic as well. So yeah, that's just something that happened in here, is like she has just too many characters, it feels like. But I do really like Allie as a character. I could stand without Dominic. There's a lot of stuff going on with that guy that I find toxic. And that's something I have a bone to pick with you, Lucy Score. Your storytelling is on point. Beautiful, beautiful storytelling. But why do I feel like all your men are toxic? Like, if I had this dude in my life, I would be like, block, delete, ghost. Like, I don't know, just bye, man, because you're a little too aggressive for me, and I'm just not into that aggressive thing. Do you think that they maybe have a little of a toxic relationship, which I am not a fan of? And I don't love how he treats like her opinions sometimes. Like, he doesn't quite respect her opinions, and that kind of hurts my soul as a woman who likes women to feel heard and seen. I just think that that's a little bit of a problem within Lucy Score books. She has men that kind of tell women what to do a lot. And I know that's some people's thing, but it's probably not mine. Yeah, it's definitely not mine. In fact, I've put down books before where I've been like, yeah, I just can't with like this man's energy. He's just got a toxic thing going. And my husband, someday I'm sure he'll be on here, he is like the sweetest little like I guess you would call him a golden retriever, but he's the sweetest man. I love him so much. And he would never ever like come and be like, sit down and do this now or else, or we're in a relationship right now, which it felt like this book was like, I'm gonna bully you into being with me. And I'm just not a fan. So that's what I read in July of 2024. I loved so much of what I read this month, but I think this one is my favorite. The Love of Your Afterlife. If you read anything I read this month, read this one. So freaking good. And I will see you guys in another video. I have so much planned. This is my first video. So if you are here and you're new, which most of you will be, please, please, please like and subscribe. I would so appreciate it. You don't know how much I appreciate your support. I have fallen into love with books as a social media manager for authors and as a brand specialist for authors. And that is why I am here to make these videos, because I want you guys to love books and to love authors as much as I do. And we will be talking books and brands later this month. I will see you guys next week for a video about my August TBR. So we will get into that next week, and I will see you guys later. Bye!